Well, good evening. It's a brand new week here on pjnet.tv. I'm Coach Prasick, and we are going to get kicked off this week with a guest that I promise you is chomping at the bit to share something that not many people are aware of. And I think that's a good reason to come on PJNet, where millions of people will find out about it. But Martin Johnson joins us. He has been on before. It was only a few months ago, Martin, but you recently contacted me and you were just eager to share something because there's something going on and very few people know about it, but it's a topic that you're quite passionate about.
It is, and it's one that I was ignorant of myself until 26 years ago this month. And March every year is Brain Injury Awareness Month. And it just happens that 26 years ago on March 31st, I sustained my brain injury where I was hit inside of the head by a truck, which shattered my skull. I ended up having 15 mini strokes during emergency brain surgery, which you can't tell, but the entire left side of my body is partially paralyzed. I can't feel that good. The left side of my mouth kind of droops.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can't tell, but you've got this beard, but I understand that beard is going to go pretty soon.
Couple of weeks.
You're an avid cyclist.
Yes, sir. And that helps with the brain injury. Most people don't realize that cycling actually helps the brain grow because it increases oxygen flow to the brain. So a lot of people with brain injuries do a lot of cycling because it helps them recover to a degree from their brain injury. And just because the nature of cycling, you use your right leg to spin, you automatically move your left leg. So,
well, for someone like yourself, you're compromised, in your left half, your left side. Cycling makes sense because you can kind of use your strength in your right side to propel yourself and just use the left just as much, just enough to balance it, I guess.
And that's exactly why I do it, and a lot of brain injury survivors do it. And a lot of therapists really push brain injury survivors to get biking.
Mm-hmm.
Because that helps to speed up the recovery process. And that's really why I started biking. I hadn't been on a bike in over 20 years until after I had my accident. And the first time I got on a bike after my accident, I think I pedaled and rolled about 2 feet before I fell off.
You went thud.
I went thud. Luckily,
Oh,
I fell to the other side.
you said something earlier and it blew right past me. You shave, you said, in 2 weeks. This is an annual ceremony for you.
It is. And what's ironic is you can't tell. I don't know if I don't have the beard, I've got a light scar that goes from my right earlobe all the way up around the top of my head to the other side from where they did the brain surgery. And it's
Well,
just between my beard line and my ear.
well, and you've got hair too, and I wonder how long that'll last.
Hopefully until I die, because I got an ugly head. I tell everybody I won't be one of those bald men just because my head with no hair on it looks like a 5-year-old's first bowling ball. I've
Uh
got
huh.
a hole here because when I got hit here on the side of the head, my brain started swelling. So they had to drill a hole through the top of the head and put a drain tube in to drain the fluid off the brain. And then I've got another hole over here, which honestly I don't even know why it's there, but it's a dent in my head. So I've got like 3 extra holes in my head here, here, and here.
Now, people that weren't here last time you were on, you tell us a little bit about your injury. You call it an accident. We call them crashes because they're not accidental; they're caused. But you were involved in a very serious car collision.
Yes, sir. I was typical college kid driving home back, trying to drive home back to my apartment on I guess the day before Easter in 1997. And as I was going through an intersection, an 18-year-old kid in his truck ran the red light and T-boned my Mustang and hit me in the side of the head, causing an open head injury, which means your skull is actually penetrated and the object next to your brain. So,
How long were you in the hospital?
I know I was in ICU for about a month. I was in the hospital. Well, I was in the ICU for a week. I was in the hospital for a month. Then I was transferred to the rehab hospital for another month. Then I left there and went to a transitional living center for people with brain injuries or stroke survivors. And I was there for almost a month before I went home for outpatient therapy.
You mentioned that March is Brain Injury Awareness Month, and it's funny, or it's coincidental, or it's worth noting that I was on Facebook and I saw someone else posting that same thing. And when I see these things where it's such and such a day or such and such month or so, the first question that comes to my mind is, by whose authority is March? I mean, did Congress declare this, or is it just something that evolved organically by consensus?
I think it is something that evolved within the brain injury community. The Brain Injury Association of America and Americans with Disabilities. What you don't realize is that every year, 1.9 million Americans alone sustain a brain injury. It's like the statistics, like every 9 seconds, somebody in America sustains a brain injury. Now, when I say a brain injury, I'm not just talking about car accidents. There's different types. I mean, a concussion is considered a brain injury.
I see. What exactly is a concussion?
A concussion is a severe blow to the head. It could be anytime the brain is shaken inside the head, and then your head is like a hollow sphere, and you have your brain in there. And as your brain moves around, which is not supposed to move, and meant to do that, and as it hits your skull,
Uh, so when the brain cells impact the skull, now there's like a fluid, in there. They give it some shock absorption and some natural, defenses against that. You mentioned earlier the brain injury, community. So, when we talk about Brain Injury Awareness Month and the brain injury community, what are some of the manifestations of that? I mean, very few people know about it, but do y'all have festivals? What kind of things happen across the land to increase public awareness of brain injuries?
Well, I know here in Georgia, the Brain Injury Association of Georgia, they actually have a camp for people, mainly children who have brain injuries. And there's actually a like not a marathon, but like a run in Atlanta they have for brain injury survivors. Every state has its own brain injury committee, kind of like I call it committee, but association. Georgia has one. And in Georgia, it is funded by a fee that they added to the tag tax back in 1997. So that funds the Georgia Traumatic Brain Injuries and Spinal Cord Injury Association in Georgia. And anybody with a brain injury or a spinal cord injury can go and apply for grants from that trust fund that they can use for needs, whether it's eyeglasses, dental care, vehicle modifications, training, education. I used it. I actually got a grant from the Georgia Trust Fund to attend the Jerry Jenkins Christian Writers Guild about a decade ago. They paid for that. They bought me a laptop that I use for the classes. They bought me glasses that I had back then. Of course, I've gone through about like 10 or 15 different pairs of glasses since then. Because what people don't realize is you don't see with your eyes. You talk, you see with your brain.
Right. Exactly.
So all glasses do is they just help adjust the hole that the light enters your eyes, but the brain. I'm legally blind because of my brain injury.
You know, Martin, for somebody who has been through what you've been through, a week in ICU, a month in the hospital, and you seem to be well adjusted. Doesn't say it well enough. Well adapted. Do you credit that to great doctors? Do you credit that to the resources that are made available through the trust fund that you referred to, or is there another component?
Of course, it's faith, because if I were to listen to the doctors back then, I would never walk again. I mean, they told my family if I lived, I would be a vegetable. So I don't know how I had the faith back then, because at that time I had been away from the church for 6 years. But God was there with me in the hospital, even though I had walked away from the faith for a while. He used that time to draw me back to him.
Well, and apparently, it's not just a case of in the crisis, we tend to dust God off and get him off the shelf and, rub the genie bottle and, say, apparently it wasn't a temporary thing, because I know that one of the complications we had tonight of getting you on our program is you had a Zoom meeting with another organization that you're involved in.
I had a Zoom interview. Well, actually, I'm an ambassador for Promise Keepers Men's Ministry, and I have been for the last 16 years. And it's interesting. I got involved with Promise Keepers after I had my accident. I got back involved in church after that, after my accident. And the first church I went to, the men's ministry, or the men in the church went to a Promise Keepers event in Columbia, South Carolina in 1997. And I had the honor of going with my father, who's a retired military. And at the time, my Sunday school teacher, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Army at the time. So I was at Promise Keepers with 2 military men. And interesting enough, the scripture for that year was 1 Corinthians 16:13, where the Apostle Paul is encouraging the men to stand firm in the faith. Do you not get the irony of that? Here I am, recovering from a brain injury and being paralyzed, where I couldn't stand to go to the bathroom or do anything on my own. And now here I am learning a verse about standing firm in the faith. So that's how I got involved with Promise Keepers.
You said that you are an ambassador for Promise Keepers. What does one have to do? What is that? What do you have to do to become an ambassador? Just be absent when they vote on it and they vote you in, or what? I mean, how does that happen?
Well, PK has a very, I don't want to say rough, but a very detailed application process, just because Promise Keepers prides itself on being men of integrity. So they do thorough background checks on anybody can apply. Anybody can apply to be an ambassador for Promise Keeper. Just go to promisekeepers.org, and there will be a background check. And you will meet with, each region has their own field leader. Each state has their own task leader. The task leader for Georgia is actually a young brother, and I call him a young brother, down in Brunswick, Georgia. And his name is Cameron Best. And he's younger than me, but he has been there for me like a brother's. Like, I can call him up, I'm like, man, I'm struggling.
Mm.
And he's like, hang in there, brother. You got it. God's got it. And that's, when you have a brain injury, there are days where, I'll be honest with you, the days are just dark. People with brain injuries have a high risk of committing suicide. Depression is really, really common with a brain injury, more so than somebody without a brain injury. So there have been times in the last year where I have gone to that dark place, and not just Cameron, but my pre-K brothers, all the other ambassadors, like gathered around me, were praying for you and encouraging me.
What the process sounds like they're vetting their ambassadors pretty carefully, but once you get through that process, pass through the gauntlet, so to speak. What did I do? I just messed up.
There you go.
What does an ambassador do?
Well, once you go through the training, they actually have now. When I first went through became an ambassador back in the early 2000s, we actually had like a training where we would go to a specific city and go through like training with leadership of the ambassador program.
Mm-hmm.
But now the new owner of Promise Keeper, Ken Henderson, he has modernized it where you go through like your training virtually through like YouTube and video courses online. And once you get done with that, once you're officially an ambassador, you will be a point man for your community for Promise Keepers, meaning you would be the go-to guy for area churches, not just the men's ministries, but the pastors. And that's one of the things that Promise Keepers really is big on now, is supporting the pastors of the local churches. And we discussed tonight that we're going to start having, before any Promise Keeper like event, there's going to be like pastor gatherings where my job will be get pastors in my local community together to talk about where their men are in the church and what their men need to grow.
It sounds like you found a happy hunting ground there, Martin, and I just am grateful that, well, God has delivered you through this for a purpose, and you have been faithful and obedient in following His calling in your life. But once He got your attention, that is, and but you're an inspiration, and it's not something that you put God back on the shelf after He delivered you through it. You've kept God and kept Jesus at the center of your heart. And Martin, thank you for helping us understand the scope and the scale and the seriousness of brain injuries, and through Brain Injury Awareness Month, which is the month of March. And I guess we'll see you again next March, but hopefully if anything happens between now and then that's worth sharing, if you take that next step in your faith, we hope that you'll get in contact with us so that you can share more when that happens.
I appreciate you having me on here.
Glad to do it. Martin Johnson on pjnet.tv. What a story. What an inspiration. Folks, don't wait for God to get your attention. Okay? But God pursues us, and He pursues us, and if we keep resisting, sometimes He has to become more heavy-handed in dealing with us, doesn't He? We do that to ourselves. Don't do that. Stay close to God. And stay close to that dial. In just a few minutes, we will have Casper Stockham on the second segment of our program. And while I'm getting everything ready for Casper, I would leave you with an assignment of sorts if you're up to the challenge. Here it goes. Ask yourself 2 questions. Here's the first one. What is the boldest thing that you have ever done in the kingdom of Christ? Second question is, how long ago was that? And the challenge is to never be satisfied with either answer.